Hello, today we will be focusing on chapters 11 through 13 of A Long Walk to Water. For this lesson, I'm going to do a brief overview of two parts and a model paragraph for your part 3 to demonstrate how to complete an evidence-based constructive response. So for part part 1 of your assignment is your vocabulary. And our first question, what does despair mean? Why does Salva feel despair? What is the relationship between despair and desperate? So you should be able to answer all three of these questions in this box. And then another vocabulary is the word stampede. So you have to understand what stampede means. So what is the definition of stampede? And why is it dangerous to be in a stampede? And you will answer that question here. Part 2, you are looking at challenges and survival. So you will list the chapter. So since we are working on chapters 11, 12, and 13, we should find an example from chapters 11, 12, and 13 of a challenge that Naya or Salva faced, and an example of survival for Naya or Salva within that chapter. And you will write your examples here with the chapter and the page number that you got your evidence from. Okay, so the main part of this lesson is this evidence-based constructive response. We're going to focus on the question, how does persistence help Salva survive in a difficult environment? So I'm going to give you an example of how to compose an evidence-based constructive response. So here we have 3 parts to your response. You have your context, which is what's going on here, what's happening in the text that helps support your answer to that question. Next, you have a quote. You have to pull a quote to support your context. And then in the end, you have your analysis, which ties back to your focus statement of, in this case, our focus statement is, how does persistence help Salva survive in a difficult situation? So we have to focus back on showing how persistence helps Salva survive in this difficult environment that he was in. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to model a paragraph for you, and your job will be to come up with an example or a paragraph from chapters 11 through 13, using an example from the text of how Salva used persistence to survive. And in your response, you cannot have what I wrote. So I'm going to take you through this. So first, we're going to start with the context. So I'm going to say that Salva's persistence is one factor in how he survives in a difficult environment. This right here is my context. All right. So now I have to come up with my evidence, my quote. I'm saying one place in the text, here I'm citing, where we see this is when Salva is crossing the desert with a group of refugees. This is a long, difficult crossing that will take at least 3 days. On the first day, Salva's only pair of shoes fall apart. He has to decide how to cope with this. The author writes, after only a few minutes, Salva had to kick off the flapping shreds and continue barefoot. And that quote can be found on page 52. So then I'm gonna, we have Salva's taking off his shoes. This is my analysis. Shows real persistence. Instead of just giving up, he decides to go barefoot. To continue his hike across the desert. Because of his persistence, Salva is able to continue and survive. All right, let me make this a little bit darker. All right, so I'm going to go back through this and I'm going to label each of these. So Salva's persistence is one factor in how he survives a difficult environment. So this right here, I'm going to highlight one color. This is my context. This is the top of that graphic organizer I showed you on the previous screen. Let's start with green. The next, if we recall from the graphic organizer, we need our quote. So I say one place in the text where we see this is when Salva is crossing the desert with a group of refugees. So I'm summarizing, giving a paraphrase. This is a long, difficult crossing that will take at least 3 days. On the first day, Salva's only pair of shoes fall apart. He has to decide how to cope with this. The author writes, after only a few minutes, Salva had to kick off the flapping shreds and continue barefoot. So here I give details from the text along with my quote. So I'm going to highlight that yellow. That's the middle. And then we have to end it. And that's with our analysis and our explanation. So we have Salva's taking off his shoes shows real persistence. Instead of giving up, he decides to go barefoot to continue his hike across the desert. Because of his persistence, Salva is able to continue and survive. And I'm going to highlight that in red because that's where we're going to end. So it's kind of almost like a reverse traffic light. So this is an example of how I gave one instance where Salva showed persistence to help him survive. So your job is to, Your job is to locate another example from chapters 11 through 13 that shows how Salva used persistence to survive a difficult situation. And your paragraph should follow this the same format. And what I would like for you to do, I would like for you to highlight each section. So you have the context, you have your quote, and you have your analysis and your explanation. So if you have not finished reading chapters 11 through 13, I would do that so that you can get this constructive response completed. Your homework will be to read chapters 14 through 15 and complete the gist of chapters 14 and 15. What is Naya's story about, and what is Salva's story about? And we will discuss this during Tuesday's lesson. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll be able to work with you on answering any questions that you have about this assignment.